Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Chris, for that. There are two or three questions, several questions that really are reflecting on the comment that you made, Chris, a bit about flooding and landslides and that area being prevalent. And therefore, the string of questions is, so why don't we just try and get out of those areas? In other words, maybe by having low densities moved away from flooded areas, not investing in our infrastructure that would be in low-lying areas, actually having a longer-term plan that tries to remove the risks from flood prevalent areas. One of them saying, let's just stop investing in East Anglia, shall we? I mean, sorry, that was probably not a below the belt comment, but is there anything given that this is going to get worse, should there not be a policy issue that says you have to show that your investment in infrastructure will be low, no risk to these climate change and particularly flooding issues?
Well, no, I don't think so, is the short answer to your question. I mean, I think we're going to have to, the interesting with flooding is that we know it's going to get worse, but we can predict quite clearly how much worse. So we have quite a good sense, thanks to all the many actors in this space who care deeply about it, about what's going to happen. There's still a big range in some of those probabilities, but we broadly know that this is going to be an issue that happens, that there's going to be a risk that we face more frequently in the future, thanks to the changing climate. It's really about the extent of it. And I suppose then we face a set of questions about what to do about that. We cannot just kind of pour enough concrete to get rid of the problem, because we just create a problem somewhere else. So this is a kind of question about the right mix of plans and strategies and policies to allow us to continue to put people where they wish to live, but also to plan key infrastructure around the increased flooding risk in the future. And I'm afraid accept that some of those areas are going to flood and therefore need to be managed in a different way, which is to accept that that's going to happen and to make people properly transparent, aware of that risk. Now, that's the issue that I feel we are not doing well on at the moment. I think we are hiding the fact that the flooding risk is there. And I'm not making a point about nefarious activity there. It's more that we are just not being honest with ourselves about the fact that this is coming. We should be more ready to talk about it, more ready to have property level flood defence, for example, is a very topical thing at the moment. You see the flooding package that the government has put out today. It talks about that. It talks about flood defences, and crucially, it also talks about natural flood defence, which is an area where, again, I think we can do more, try and reduce the risk, but not remove it. So I think there are things you can do, but I don't think it would make sense for us to take a blanket approach and say that every investment has to have zero risk of flooding built into it. I mean, I just don't think that would be practical, given where economic activity happens in our economy and geographically, and the need for people to live in those areas. They must do so in the full knowledge of the risks that they are facing, but we can manage that too.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the time. This is we're doing fine. I'm going to ask two almost not opposite questions, but different in scale. Lorraine talked about, so the first one is to Lorraine, and you talked about localism in your what do you think with this country's systems, whether local, because if you looked at what Chris was saying, he was saying probably that some of the least prepared areas are minor roads, i.e. the first and last mile issues, but you were talking about localism, and therefore whether or not we should be local resources and local issues higher. What do you think about that, Lorraine?
I mean, I think it relates to what Chris was just talking about in terms of kind of regenerating local communities and, shopping and locally, etc. And Nick's point about kind of, maybe we need to kind of think about whether what we need to be doing, we can, do that more locally. And so it kind of, I suppose it's sort of part of this. There's a choice to be had as to whether we continue to, travel long distances to do what we need to do for work and for other things, or we actually make a conscious decision to regenerate our cities and towns in ways that promote more local, shorter distances and more local lifestyles, etc., and more kind of community focused interactions. But if we do that, yes, I guess we need, so the local authorities, I was struck also by that point that Chris made about local authorities just not really investing or paying attention to kind of climate adaptation in terms of local infrastructure. So yeah, we need to be kind of mindful of that, or we need that to be kind of further up the agenda at the local authority level, I guess. But yeah.
Okay, in which case, could I press you a bit more then, Lorraine, because so the question here was from Basil O'Fee. Actually, was about this one. It was an open-ended question saying that you'd made a reference to localism. Could you extend it further? If I can help on that bit, then if we say, because the Independent Transport Commission is interested in policy issues, if we say actually a more resilient future would be making cities, and I suppose localism means more self-sufficient, does it, or certainly favouring local suppliers, manufacturers, then how, in a policy sense, can we progress that?
I feel like I might ask Chris to help me out here.
What do you think?
Well, I think I'll be honest with you. I think there's rather too much. People do it. It's far too complicated. What do we want? Well, I think we could all. I think we could all agree we'd like to see more vibrant local communities. That doesn't seem to be a very, very controversial thing. Let's work back from that. A key condition on that is to have a vibrant high street and good local transport links to it, and the need to travel less to the major metropolitan centres, and perhaps a need to travel less internationally, although that's really only an issue for a very small proportion of the population who do that. We can do all of that. So that I think is a bit, the main point for me is about setting a compelling strategy and vision for achieving that, and then lining up the kind of various policies that we have to try and encourage that to happen. It's not for the government in totality to achieve it, but it is, I think it is for a combination of government at local level and central level to make sure that the environment is right for that, and then for there to be local commerce, local jobs, and local opportunities to come with it. I mean, the things that we'll need to do to achieve that are like Lorraine. I suspect I'm out of my comfort level when it comes to that, but they will involve looking at commercial rents for spaces in those high streets, and a creative use of local taxes, I suspect, as well. But again, we can do all of this. There has to be a will to do it first. And as my point earlier was to make the point that the moment we're in now is a tremendous opportunity to look again at some of this, which I fear we will miss unless we grasp it. So I very much hope that the politicians are listening to that, because I think there's a huge appetite amongst the populace to see it happen.
Great. I feel a little bit like we're all joint Joe Wickses here. In that we got up to I reckon 60 participants, and I was really sort of pumping the air here as the numbers were rapidly going up. I can see we've got a hard core of participants now, because it's about halved what we got to at some time or other. So I think we're getting towards the end of what. But my last question, and you can take this either way. And that is about other countries, because I always believe if you've got a problem yourself, somebody else somewhere will be tackling this. So I don't know whether or not you looked at any other countries as to how they're handling this issue better, or they're a bit ahead of us, or whether or not we're showing the way. I don't know. I mean, each of you can have a go on that general question, but each of you must know internationally who are the organisations and people you look to. How about you first, Chris?
Well, I'm going to start by saying that we have to, we beat ourselves up a lot when it comes to assessing our preparedness for climate change when it comes to transport. But actually, we're not bad globally, in my understanding. So that's both our strategies for reducing emissions from the transport sector and also how well adapted the sector itself is to climate risk. We are one of the better places to look for that. So let's celebrate that. This is about building on that from here on in. The places I look are definitely on the continent. So in particular, those areas that have really grasped the challenge of reducing transport demand or reducing a demand for fossil fuel vehicles in the first place, making better provision in cities and towns for walking and cycling. That's suddenly, you know, kind of the discussion of the moment, but it's been like that for several decades in other parts of the world, and it wasn't always like that. These are places that did plan for a kind of future based on cars. So they're the places I would look for creative planning, going back to the earlier question that I answered. I'm afraid I don't know how well prepared they are for climate change itself, but I suspect they are, given the extent of local control and accountability there is for transport decisions there. So, you know, that's something I guess there's a broader discussion we could have about the governance of these issues, but we do see a kind of rich discussion about how climate change might impact on local communities in other areas of Europe. And I think that's often where I look to for, you know, great transport planning. You can look at kind of mega cities, places, interesting places like Singapore. I don't know if we've got too much to learn from that. I'm sure London perhaps does, but other than that, I think it's much better to look at those areas that have achieved, you know, a kind of richer, broader transport system that is less reliant on fossil fuels and better prepared for climate change itself, and you'll find them on the continent.
Great. Lorraine?
Yeah, not much to add. I mean, so my expertise is more in mitigation actually than adaptation. I am part of the IPCC working group too, which is looking at impacts and adaptation. And some of the discussion has been around kind of certain European cities that are doing quite well in terms of adaptation. I think Malmö and maybe Berlin and one or two other places are reasonably proactive. And where we're also interested is where they actually link up adaptation and mitigation. So they look for those kind of win-wins, and some of these cities are really leading the way. But as Chris says, some UK cities are doing that also. So I live in Bristol, and they're forward thinking actually when it comes to thinking about both climate change impacts and mitigating climate change. So yeah, I think that there's quite a lot going on at the city level that we can really, I think, sort of celebrate in the UK, as well as look to some European neighbours as well as to what they're doing.
I think about it. I've got one more question. Anyway, that one for international comparisons was David Tarrant. I thought that was a great one. In your slide that showed the different part, and you were Chris, you were busy saying that ports and airports were not that well prepared. Do you know if the airlines themselves, and this is a question from Scott Witchold, do you know the air industry, whether it has got resilience plans, and where do you think of course we're all at the moment looking up to the skies and seeing how few planes there are flying around, and I think I heard a bit ago that on Monday Gatwick had 23 passengers in the whole day, I think it was. But you know, things are trying to get going again and a return. Have the airlines figure highly in resilience plans, Chris?
I don't know, but I can say with some confidence that they will certainly have expressed a view on it, because they do care deeply about closures of airports. So one of the reasons why Heathrow and Gatwick is so well provided for when it comes to the future changes that we're expecting in the climate is because the airlines themselves have demanded that. But there's a very, very complicated relationship between the owners of those airports and the airlines themselves, as you can see from the ongoing discussion about whether Heathrow will receive its third runway. And you can see that some of those airlines and operators are very unhappy about that kind of investment, because it will be them that kind of shoulder it in the end. So I'd be amazed if they hadn't expressed a view on resilience planning, but I'm afraid I'm not informed enough to know whether that's been made public.
Okay. Great. Well, that's there's quite a few more questions that we haven't been able to get round to answer. I do apologise to those that if they feel left out, I've tried to cover as many people as I can, as well as the questions. I wouldn't mind, and I don't know whether or not we can circulate these questions to you two, Chris and Lorraine, whether perhaps you could, whether there's anything in there you wouldn't mind answering as well, because I think when we do a report, as we've said before, we're going to do a report on this annual lecture. We could perhaps cover those questions that we didn't have time to get around to. But I just really like to thank you. First of all, can I thank, sorry, Nick, I don't know if you've got any other comments you'd like made at the moment. Okay, sorry, on mute, there we are. Okay, I think that's Nick saying probably not. Chris and Lorraine, are there anything that you wanted to say that there wasn't an occasion to so far?
Not for me.
Okay, that's great. So first of all, can I thank all the attendees, all those 60 odd when we peaked, and certainly the 30 that stuck with us all the way through. So thanks to all of those. Can I thank Olivia and also Hayley, who have been behind the scenes sorting out all the technology for all of this. Interesting. I'm involved in some research that's going on at Cambridge at the moment, which is about digital management of cities, you know, and how all this sort of stuff. And one of the things they're coming up with now is the case for trying to run cities more digitally does now not need to be made. I mean, before that, there were some municipalities and so on are thinking, well, you know, when's it going to come and affect us? Everybody sees the value of that, and everybody sees the value of technology now. So thanks to Olivia and Hayley for doing that. I have obviously got delighted to thank our corporate members and donors with their generous support for this. Nick, can I thank you and the Centre for Transport Studies at UCL for letting us use your systems for this. Seems to me to be worked well, although it's a novel thing for me to try and manage this. And then finally, Lorraine and Chris, can I thank you immensely for the work in the preparation, for the thoughts that you've given us, and yes, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot, everybody. I think we'll bring this to a close now, and there will be a report. And the best of good health to you all. Bye now.